Let's do one more question here, and then I'll open the floor for any questions from all of you. Let's do, options aren't as tested. Let's do this one here. The fixed rate of return offered by preferred stocks or bonds is a primary factor when considering. I like this type of question because it's asking you the different type of risks, and just a tip for all of you, you should be familiar with all of these different types of risks. So what is inflation risk, credit, interest rate, and reinvestment rate risk? They might ask you which one of these investments is going to be more sensitive, and they'll list these type of different risks. This is a typical and common asked question here. Fixed rate of return offered by preferred stocks or bonds is a primary factor when considering what? So this risk factors here, I believe we have a slide in the lectures that give you an overview of all the different type of risks. Highly encourage you to go back, proactively review this slide, maybe come up with some different investments that can fall into each one of these different categories. And the correct answer here is going to be A, inflation risk. Inflation risk. I see some of you put interest rate risk, and I see some of you put reinvestment rate risk, and I can see where you're headed, where your thinking is going, but that's not entirely correct for this question. So let's talk about this really quickly. Three main things to keep in mind here. Firstly, the fixed rate of return, that's a key point, fixed. Right? It's a fixed rate of return. We're getting a fixed amount each, semi-annual period, quarterly, maybe annually. We're talking about preferred stocks and bonds, so that's playing on that fixed rate of return theme there. And so we're thinking about which one of these risks would be most important to consider for things that are paying a fixed amount of interest or dividends. The second thing I like to do with these type of questions is I like to go one by one. Define the term, and see, does it actually make sense for the scenario presented? Let's talk about it, inflation risk. When you think about inflation, you should start thinking what? Cost of goods. I think of inflation, I think of cost of goods, I think of the consumer price index. CPI is a term that you may see on your exam, CPI. When you see CPI, consumer price index, you should just be thinking inflation. You should be thinking cost of goods. So if the CPI is rising and the cost of goods is rising, what do we think will happen to instruments that are paying a fixed rate of return? Bonds, preferred stocks with their dividends, maybe even some REITs if they're paying a fixed dividend, mostly preferred stock in this scenario. So if the cost of goods are rising and inflation is going up, right, the price of everything is rising, our money that we're getting every year doesn't have as much buying power. We're not able to buy as much as we were before when inflation was a lot lower. So I like inflation risk. I like this answer choice because it makes sense. I'm getting a fixed return. Inflation is going up. My return is not able to buy as much money as it did previously. Credit risk here doesn't really make sense because credit risk is asking you, is an issuer likely to repay their debt or not? We don't really care about that in this question here. It's not asking us about credit worthiness, whether or not we're going to get repaid. We can take B right off our answer choice selection. Interest rate risk here, not as important for this question here. Interest rate risk is the risk that an investment that an investor makes, a bond or something of that nature, typically a debt security. That debt security will change in value because of a fluctuation in interest rates. So if the interest rates are going up, for instance, bond prices are going to go down. Your bond there is at risk for decreasing in value. But if interest rates are going down, then your bond is going to go up a little bit higher. Fixed rate of return, not really important for interest rate risk here. We don't really care about the changing interest rates. Reinvestment rate risk, this is the risk that there's going to be no available instruments that will provide a similar return to the one we currently own. So in other words, if I buy an 8% corporate bond and the Fed announces that they're going to lower their interest rates, well, now I face interest rate risk because I was getting 8% and the Fed is going to lower their rates to 6%. Now I have to take my $80 interest payments and reinvest them into instruments that are not yielding that 8% that I am, but at a lower rate at 6%. So that's what reinvestment rate risk, the fact that you reinvest the interest that you earn into something lower. That's the risk that's there. You're not going to be paid the same interest rate that you're being paid now. So inflation risk, that's the top choice here. We're focusing on that fixed rate of return. That's what we're fixating on. We're thinking about, okay, well, what are some of the things that pay a fixed rate of return? Preferred stocks or bonds. And if I'm getting my fixed coupon, the risk here is that inflation might be going up. My money's not going to be able to buy as much as it did before. Interest rate risk, a little bit more relevant for bond pricing in terms of if you think rates are going to go down or up, what should I do when buying securities there?